In this episode, we continue our discussion on the children of God. We'll look at various celebrities that were either born into or those who joined the cult as adults. In addition, we'll discuss phrases the members were encouraged to say when making love to Jesus Christ. Welcome to another episode of the Cabinet of Dr. Mystery. I am your host, Dr. Mystery.
I tried to create living zombies.
Reports that have been made by credible observers of relatively incredible things.
God, give me strength.
All I got to do is relax, and they'll take me to their death.
Last chance to evacuate Earth before it is recycled.
This is a wicked, wicked world.
We are all evil in some form or another.
Welcome, Mysterians. We hope that you enjoyed that little break where we talked about Ahools with my favorite, wonderful, amazing guest. Thank you so much, Hassan, for joining us, and it was a wonderful opportunity. So I hope that you enjoyed, but we're going to jump back into some Children of God content. I hope you're ready, because you're fucking not ready. In our last episode in the Children of God series, we ended while discussing a former member, Vivian Shillander. I promised I would give you an update on her and her children, whom she rescued from one of the cult's communes in Vietnam. Just a real quick recap on Vivian. She was in the cult with her husband, and they were living in Vietnam. In Vietnam, she felt that she had no control over her children, no control over her life, because she's in a cult and she does not. And she was being abused by her husband, and there was a lot of discussion about the flirty fishing. Now, the problem is when you're in the cult, you give them all of your possessions, so you have no money, no phone, no technology. I mean, they probably didn't have as readily accessible phone access as we do now, internet access. She was basically trapped in Vietnam. She had no way out. What she did was she took her newborn baby. She feared for the child's safety. She feared for all her children, but she couldn't take all of her children. So she did the only thing that she could think to do, which is flee with the only child that she could safely take with her. The only child that she had enough access to that she could readily take that child, and she fled to the U.S. After several years trying to go through the proper channels and speaking with authorities such as the FBI and police forces, after all those avenues failed, after everything failed her and she had no recourse, what she did was she reached out to a church. And that's one good thing that churches do provide, is that sense of community, that belonging. So she reached out to the church, and the church was able to help her out with some benefactors. And they set up this beautiful, wonderful house for her and her children. They gave her enough money. She raised enough money that she was able to hire a private investigator. And with this private investigator, Vivian went to Vietnam, located her children, and rescued her children from the cult. Now, as I said in our previous episode, her children had been brainwashed. We see this again and again. People that are in the cult, they are brainwashed. They are constantly fed this misinformation. Berg's whole attack on the system, that everyone who isn't a part of the cult is a systemite. And you're basically taught that it's going to be the end of the world. So when she rescued her children and she brought them back, they weren't happy. They wanted to stay in the cult in Vietnam. They wanted to stay with their father because it had been 3 or 4 years at this point, and they didn't know their mother at all. When you're born into a cult, that's the only thing that you know, right? So how are you going to know any different? You're scared. You're terrified. I don't want to go and Dad said you're a monster. That's the only person that's been in my life. So they had this real difficulty coming back to, I guess, coming to America for the first time, but they had this real difficulty coming home with her. We ended just very abruptly talking about her family. So somebody did reach out to me and they said, "Hey, what's up with Vivian? You can't leave us hanging like that." I promised that I would give an update on Vivian. So I found an old forum post from 2005, and that's really the latest thing that I can find. But it is a ex-family forum, so that former members of the church, former members of the Children of God, they can come to this forum. So on this forum, in this post, Vivian says that she is remarried and she lives in Sioux Falls. One of her children, Richard, lives in Brookings, just 45 kilometers, I'm assuming, north of her. And she says he's done very well for himself, but I can't say he is totally out of the cult completely, because I do believe he still associates with some, and he doesn't consider the group evil. So I'm assuming that means that he still associates with certain members within the cult. Which, you know, if you grew up in the cult and that's the only thing you knew for a really long time, it would be difficult to let go. Especially if you came in touch with people that were in the cult with you when you were younger. People that could relate to troubles that you're going through with reintegrating. She also goes on to say that she doesn't actually have any communication with Richard. The only way that she knows any of this is through her other children who do speak to her. Another one of her children, John, he is living in Thailand, but not in the group. He's staying there with his stepmother's grandmother. Her daughter, April, is in Rapid City. She is married to a man from Kazakhstan, and she lives in Rapid City. Her other son, Caleb, has moved to Rapid City as well. He's studying Chinese, and he's very knowledgeable of our alternative medicines. And he is also a vegan, something that I also really enjoy, is veganism. Finally, Francisco works for IBM. Yan is a senior at SD School of Mines and Technology, majoring in physics. So all of her children, they all seem to be relatively well adjusted. So, you know, I guess you could say that that's kind of a good... It's difficult to say that this is a good story, right? It has a happy ending because, as you can see from this forum post, there's still a lot of problems that arose because of the children of God and because of the practices that they were, you know, instilling on these young children. So let's take it back to the 80s. One additional Mo letter that has a really profound impact, it's called "The Devil Hates Sex, but God Loves It." In this letter, David writes about the benefits of polygamy, having several wives to share the chores and their bed. He speaks about incest, saying that sex is a beautiful gift from God. He goes on to discuss sexual relationships with underage children, stating, "I don't know what the hell age has got to do with it when God made them able to enjoy it practically from the time they're born. But though God didn't count them as underage, to have sexual feelings and sexual responses and sexual nerves and sexual orgasms from the time they're born, the system prohibits them from having them until they're 18 to 21. David outlines that, in his opinion, the system, quote unquote, the system, it only allows sex when the system or people within the system can capitalize. They use sex to make money and control people. He continues saying that sex should be a free form of expression, regardless of age or blood relation. In verse 40 of this writing, he states, "God made the male and female, not the devil. God blessed them and said, 'Be fruitful and multiply.' In other words, go to it. Start fucking. Right out here in the open, in public, in the garden, on the grass." In verse 44, he also made a really weird comment about California, which I don't know if it's true or not. He writes that he asked a quote-unquote young Latin, as he calls her, about what California means. Her response was that California means hot cock. David says, "It must have been a place for hot cock in the early days, and it still has that reputation of sex and sexual freedom." So seriously, I don't know if that's true or not. If California actually does mean hot cock, please email me, cabinetofmystery@gmail.com. If you know the actual translation of California is hot cock, let me know, because then we're going to have to do some different merchandise. This letter, "The Devil Hates Sex, but God Loves It," it continues. A total of 140 verses. So I'm not going to sit here and read you this whole thing because it's a lot of repeating, you know, the same thing over and over again. But there is one particular verse that I found really striking, one thing that I would like to share with you. And it's a long one, so strap in. David writes that the only way to get free of the devil and his lies and his prohibitions and guilt complexes about sex is to get rid of his lies and his lying propaganda, his anti-sex propaganda, and believe that the Lord and His Word and His creation and God's love and His freedom, that there is nothing in the world at all wrong with sex as long as it's practiced in love, whatever it is or whoever it's with, no matter who or what age or what relative or what manner. And you don't hardly dare even say these words in private. If the law ever got a hold of this, they would try to string me up. They would probably lynch me before I got to the jail. When Paul said, "All things are lawful unto me, but all things are not expedient," he was as good as saying, I can indulge in any kind of sex I want to, but I've got to watch out for the system because it's against the law. We are free in privacy, and that's about all, and we might not be free if they discovered what we do in private. There are no relationship restrictions or age limitations in His law of love. If you hate sex, you are one of the devil's crowd. If you think it's evil, then God and love are evil, for He created it. Now, this is the best quote, maybe the worst quote. This is the best quote that shows you who David Berg actually is right here. He says, "Come on, let's love and enjoy it like God does. He loves it." If anything, the last few episodes where we've discussed David Berg and this cult, it shows that he does not care about the safety of children. It shows that he is not concerned at all with incest. He doesn't find anything wrong with incest. He doesn't find anything wrong with having sex with children. His own words, there is no limitation on age. There is no limitation on relationship. So if you are related to somebody, if it's a young child, he does not care. Now, again and again, he uses the term lovingly. So he says, as long as you do anything in a loving manner, it cannot be wrong. So if you have sex with a child, if you do it in a loving manner, it cannot be wrong. As long as you act out in a loving manner, everything's fine. Everything's fair game as long as you do it in a loving way. I just don't understand the logic behind it. But the problem is that you have all these people that are in these cults, and they're basically told they have no other option. Like in that last verse, if you hate sex, then you're a devil. You're the devil. You're against God. All these people are told that what they're doing is in a loving way. And that's what we've discussed in the last few episodes, is that these people are basically brainwashed. And it's difficult to say, but a lot of these people that are, they're not higher ups, they're just people within the cult that got roped in. You know, a lot of people that weren't leaders that just got roped into the cult through its evangelism and its outside view, you know, how they put up this front so that you would think that it was a loving and wonderful community. And maybe it started out as such, but it did not end that way. And in fact, it hasn't even ended. It's still going on, but we'll get to that in a later episode. But you see that all these people, you know, you can't completely say that they're innocent. All these people that committed sexual assaults, you can't say they're innocent in any way, but certain people within the cult, you know, they didn't have a choice. Sure, you can say they had a choice. They could leave, they could walk away, but when your whole life is in one spot, is in one community, and if you don't participate in the actions and the practices that they're enforcing, you'll be excommunicated, right? And you have no idea, especially if you're born into the cult, you have no idea what the outside world is like. These people, they could be beaten, they could be excommunicated, they could be sheltered into seclusion and brainwashed and forced to, you know, the only way you can get out of this tiny room where we're torturing you is, you know, molest this child. And there are countless accounts of people going on to radios, you know, radio shows and television networks and magazines doing interviews and talking about, you know, there was one man, I believe he was in his 20s. He said that he was forced to have sex with a young woman, like a 10-year-old girl. There's another person who said that he was forced to accept masturbation from a 4-year-old. I believe that's how young the child was. Both of those men that I'm thinking of, I can't remember their names, but I do know that both of them have committed suicide. And in a little bit, we'll get into just how many members of the cult have actually committed suicide. All the research that I've done, it just leads me to the same conclusion. David Berg changed history. Now, I'm saying that in the same way that Adolf Hitler changed history. Neither of them did it for the better. And, I'm saying that knowing full well in the back of my mind that a lot of these people that I've researched, a lot of the ex-family members from the cult, they will say, these bad things happened to me. These things have changed my life forever. These are things that I can't unsee, etc. But then they'll also say, well, it was a two-sided coin, double-sided coin. On one hand, you have the systemic abuse and the sexual assault and all this weird free-sharing sex stuff. But on the other hand, you have people who say, well, I'm never going to get to experience that level of family again. Right? I'm never going to get to, we'll get into it in a bit, but one of the celebrities, he said that one thing that I will always miss and I'll never be able to get again would be 300 people in a room chanting and singing the exact same song together. He said that that was very powerful. The beatings, neglect, and systemic sexual and physical assault resulted in many members developing PTSD, anxiety, depression, developing addictions, and many other illnesses. To date, there's at least 25 suicides connected to the children of God and the family. In 1988, there was a lot of negative publicity, and the children of God were exposed for their child neglect and their sexual abuse practices. As a result, David sent out a letter abolishing and renouncing any writings or any sexual activities involving minors. Signed, Moses David, the letter states, quote, "We do not approve of sex with minors. We absolutely forbid it." Maybe contradicting himself a little bit there. Now, with that being said, in 1993, the same leaders sent another letter that stated, quote, "Having sex with minors is banned and forbidden. That does not mean that loving affection between two people, regardless of age, provided it's not hurtful and both parties like it and want it, that does not mean that it is wrong. But in the present moral climate of the world, today it is wrong for us, as it hurts the work of God." Basically, they're saying we need to stop sexualizing and molesting children because the world, aka the system, thinks it's wrong, and now they're watching us because we have been doing these things. So it's not that they're going to ban it. It's not that they're going to forbid it. It's not that they're going to stop it. It's that they got caught, and that they don't want the world, the system, to see them because the system views it as wrong. So they're not really admitting any guilt here. They're not really banning any practices. They're outright just saying, we got caught doing it and now we look bad, so let's stop doing it in public. Let's stop doing it where we can be caught. This letter continues to say, if it's not hurtful, if it's loving, then it's okay. Of course, having actual intercourse with a child wouldn't be okay, as it wouldn't be loving. But a little fondling and sweet affection is not wrong in the eyes of God. And if they've experienced it in the past, if they've experienced the same, they weren't abused. So that very strongly outlines that they are not banning the practice. They are not forbidding it. They are writing it down and saying that they forbid it so that the system is complacent, that the system sees this and will let them be in peace, let them do the disgusting, depraved acts that they're going to continue to do in peace behind closed doors now, less open. We'll talk about David Berg's death and the later years of the cult in a future episode. However, in 1995, shortly after his death, Karen, aka Queen Maria, released a series of letters about, quote, loving Jesus. Loving Jesus is a description that the cult uses to recount their sexual relationship with Jesus. This idea of loving Jesus arises from the idea of mystical marriage, also known as bridal theology. In a previous episode, I had mentioned how the cult interpreted biblical teachings and prophetic visions in a way that involved actual sex with a spiritual manifestation of Jesus. I also mentioned how the group had specific phrases to say when making love to Jesus. We'll get into that in a little bit, but I wanted to look into the history of mystical marriage. Bridal theology began as an idea that the church itself is the bride of Christ, wed in a holy union with Christ. This idea shifted to mean that individual followers in the church were married to Christ themselves. Some Roman Catholic nuns believe that they themselves are wed to Jesus. Occasionally, these said nuns will hold wedding ceremonies, complete with cakes and a wedding ring, which honor their union with Christ. Now, if we look at the book in the Bible, Song of Songs, or the Song of Solomon, we see numerous erotic passages. There are two ways. There are two ways that you can look at this book. You can look at it as a relationship between a man and a woman, between two human beings having a loving and sexual relationship. Or you can look at it as a way to define a love language that God would speak to his followers and to his people, and instead of thinking about it as a human sexual or a human loving connection, you can think about it as God to his people. With that being said, it is kind of difficult to skip over some of these erotic passages where they're clearly talking about female genitalia or female breasts, or that it's these sexual innuendos that I'm about to read that really show you, in my personal opinion, that the Song of Solomon is nothing more than an erotic love letter. It would be what my sext would be with my ex if you made it into kind of a biblical play. At various times, there's references to women's breasts, referring to them as towers, twin fawns of a gazelle, clusters of grapes on a vine, etc. There's also references to myrrh in a weirdly sexual context. Song of Songs 5:4-5 reads, "My beloved thrust his hand through the latch opening. My heart began to pound for him. I arose to open for my beloved, and my hands dripped with myrrh." Sticky. There's also a reference to, quote, sisterly love. Some people argue that this implies the relationship of incest. Song of Songs 4:10-12 reads, "How delightful is your love, my sister! How much more pleasing is your love than wine, and the fragrance of your perfume more than any spice. You are a garden locked up, my sister, my bride. You are a spring enclosed, a sealed fountain." A sealed fountain. I don't really know what that says, but to me, personally, I would agree that it sounds a little incestual. Since we're on the subject of mystical marriage, we need to talk about Bernard of Clairvaux. Bernard of Clairvaux was a biblical scholar and an abbot. He was canonized in 1174. Saint Bernard, no relation to Beethoven. 90s kids, you might understand. Saint Bernard was also bestowed with the title of Doctor of the Church. This title is given to saints in recognition of them having made significant contributions to church theology or doctrine throughout their research or teachings or writings. Saint Bernard was a huge fan of the Song of Solomon or the Song of Songs. He was such a big fan that he wrote a collection of 86 sermons on the Song of Solomon. 86. Now, one of the main reasons I'm bringing this up, talking about Saint Bernard, was that at various times throughout his sermons, he referred to himself as a woman, and he advised his fellow monks to be mothers and to, quote, let your bosoms expand with milk, not swell with passion. I don't know what that means. I am just picturing, when I picture a monk, I picture, and especially St. Bernard, because he had this whole thing. He had the monk robes, right? His were white, I believe. And you have that bald spot on the top of your head where they shave it bald. Maybe once you become a monk, it's like a reverse Homer. You start to lose hair in the center only. But when you look at St. Bernard, that's what he looks like. And I'm just picturing all of his fellow monks look like that. And he wants them to grow big, ginormous breasts. Just like 200 monks with the most pronounced, voluptuous breasts. That's all I picture. With all of this being said, some Christians believe themselves that they are wed to Christ. Most of them believe this in a spiritual manner, more of like your soul is the bride and you're married to Christ. This idea of bridal theology and mystical marriage, it's been around for centuries. You can find it represented in paintings, in scripture, in every sort of idea, every work of art, and written word for centuries you can find bridal theology. Now, another thing that we see from St. Bernard is that idea of a man imagining himself as a woman in a way that he can have an intimate sexual or an intimate relationship with Jesus, of course, who is another man. Let's circle back. Let's circle back around to Karen Zerby's loving Jesus doctrine. The children of God, of course, needed to take things a step further with their bridal theology. So in these writings, these loving Jesus writings, I believe it's a 4-part series, members are encouraged to imagine that Jesus is having sex with them during sexual intercourse or masturbation. Along with this, members 16 or older were given a list of sexually explicit expressions or phrases for members to say to Jesus. In one of Karen's prophetic writings, she says Jesus came to her and spoke the following words. For just like you love one another, and like you say words of endearment and words of desire, and like you cry out words of ecstasy, do so unto me. Just like you say, quote, I want you and I need you, and come in unto me. Let us be one. Let us love. Let us lie in each other's arms. Kiss me, caress me, fuck me, and love me. Fill me to the full. Oh, I don't know why I said that with so much enthusiasm. Fill me to the full. Oh, God. So say these words to me. These are words that you can understand, for they express the desire and the love that is in your heart. This love that is in your heart, for me, is much greater than words. But the words help you to understand and help you to focus. So use these words with me, for am I not your lover? Am I not your husband? Are you not the bride of Christ? Why do you think I give you these illustrations? This is the reason why I brought up St. Bernard. In these visions, in these prophetic visions that Karen had, male members are told to visualize themselves as women in order to avoid a homosexual relationship with Jesus. Because remember, homosexuality is an excommunicable offense. There's also a very intriguing poem that Karen wrote on the subject of men having sex with Jesus. In the Spirit, you are happy all day long. For in the Spirit, there's much more right than wrong. In the Spirit, you can sing our brand new song. In the Spirit, you don't need to have a dong. You don't need to have a dong. You don't need to have a dong. There's also... Fuck. There's also another wonderful poem about having a vagina, but we will save that for another time. Maybe that'll be a bonus episode. I'll just talk about how Karen thinks Jesus sees vaginas. Join our subscription. In this letter, Karen continues on about the subject of men having sex with Jesus. Do not think, oh, I have this ugly old penis in the way, for I do not see this. I see you as a radiant and loving bride, one whom I love, my dearest one. For I see in the Spirit, and you must see in the Spirit. Do not see in the flesh. Simply think of yourself as a woman unto me, and say those things that a woman would say, and this will suffice. Don't worry about your ugly old penis. When it comes to having sex with Jesus, he will make you a woman. Oh, God. I don't know if I'd be crying out, oh, fill me up, Jesus. Fill me up, Jesus. Come on, Jesus. Fill me up. I don't know if I'd be doing that, but, I'd probably have sex with Jesus. If he came down, he was like, hey, bro, what's up? Maybe. We'll see. It's 2020. It's 2021. That means I got to try anything, right? Oh, God. There are plenty of songs from the Children of God musical ministries that touch on various sexual relationships with Jesus. And they also include some of these phrases and just the idea of having an intimate sexual relationship with Jesus. There's quite a few songs in their archives that have this as that's the whole reason for the song, have sex with me, Jesus. So I wanted to take some time to discuss some famous faces, some celebrities that were either born into or raised in the cult. So the thing with this cult, with the Children of God, is not only did they draw people in through their music, they had people who were already musicians that were drawn into the cult. I was going to discuss one very famous musician, but there's actually a lot more to it, this famous musician being involved in the cult, than I thought there was. And I think that the book that I'm going to be reading for the next episode will actually feature him quite heavily. So I'm going to save this one certain musician, this one certain celebrity, for a future episode. And I keep doing that to you. I'm so sorry. I keep finding more information that I could use, or more books or more resources that I could use to tell a better story. And I apologize that I haven't gotten to Ricky's story yet, but we'll get there, and it will be powerful and it will be impactful. So, it's going to be worth the wait. So I really hope that you're excited for the rest of the series, because there's so much to unpack here. I was originally planning on just doing a 2-part series, and it's just every time I find something new and interesting, it leads me down a deep rabbit hole. And I mean, it's not necessarily a bad thing, because I'm learning a lot more about this cult than I even really knew to begin with. I thought I knew a lot about the Children of God, and there's a lot that I don't know about that we're discovering together. So I'm excited. I know this is dark subject matter, but I think stories like these are important to continue to talk about, because people kind of forget that the family is still in operation today. They think that this is something that happened in the past, but people don't think about the Children of God and the family as something that is actively still happening today. And it would be hard to say, and hard to prove. It would be difficult to prove that there's still systemic abuse and sexual abuse going on today. And, the family will tell you that they've reformed their practices, but there is evidence that in foreign countries, there is still sexual assault and abuse and negligence that's happening in the families' communes in different countries. So when we get into talking about celebrities that were from or raised in or brought up into the cult, these celebrities, these famous people, they were required to perform acts and musical numbers and sing and dance and act out plays and skits in the streets. When we're looking at the history of the cult, in the last 3 episodes, one thing that we've seen over and over again is this musical aspect, these skits, these plays, this traveling evangelism where they load all their musical instruments into the bus, they travel somewhere, and then they load out. And they have all these musical instruments and they have these bands. They started out as Teens for Christ. Throughout the history of the children of God, all of these people have the same thing. They're meant to sing and dance and act out skits, and they're meant to evangelize through their performances. So I think one main reason why we see all these celebrities coming out of the children of God is because that's what they did day after day for their money and for the cult. I truly feel that with these musical acts and these performances and this busking on the street, I feel like you kind of develop a love for acting, a love for performing. The first celebrity that I'd like to talk about is Rose McGowan. Rose McGowan was born into the children of God. In the Italian countryside in Florence, Italy, she was born in a duke's estate, which was left as property of the children of God. Her father, Daniel McGowan, ran an Italian commune of the children of God, so an Italian chapter. Rose mentions living in conditions with no electricity and children sleeping on flimsy colored mats. Rose recalls singing and busking on the streets, performing for sick kids in hospital, and she was supposed to raise money while doing this. Frequently in many interviews and her book, which I listened to, she used the word systemites to refer to worldly people, which is another reference to David Berg's attack on the system. So I don't feel like Rose is brainwashed. That's not what I'm trying to say here. What I'm trying to say is that you can see Berg's influence even on people who are out of the cult. You see people who think that the cult is evil. You still see them using words like systemites. It just shows you that there's a pattern of systemic brainwashing and this groupthink mentality. It truly affects who you are. In multiple interviews, in various writings, and just over the course of everything that I've listened to or read from Rose about the children of God, she tells this story of being slapped and beaten when she refused to accept God. She wanted to accept her own God instead of the God the children of God believed. She was repeatedly asked and rejected their God each time, and each time she was assaulted. She recalls being attacked in a hallway in her home and had her hand cut when she had a blemish. I feel like it's necessary to reiterate that a lot of these people that lived in the Children of God communes, they shared homes. So I said her home, but this wasn't necessarily just Rose's home. And she probably grew up that way, sharing her home with multiple people and not it just being her and her parents. It was probably like other families as well. Rose said after this man attacked her in the hallway that he said perfection in all things. Throughout the book, she really talks about how she took that to heart when she was in the Children of God cult, that they expected her to be perfect. They expected perfectness out of everyone. And that's something that's, ingrained in all of the Children of God members from the very beginning. If you're not perfect, you're subject to beatings or being shunned or being ostracized. I think that one thing is really clear, that the cult will always put on a front. It's just crazy to think about how twisted and manipulative you have to be a leader in this organization. Rose said that her only friends were her brother and a little lamb that she raised. One day at the dinner table, everyone laughed at her as she took a bite of her food. One cruel member that lived in the household, he informed her it was her pet lamb that they were eating. And as he informed her this, everyone continued to laugh at her. Over the years, Rose's father moved her family around Europe to the order's various compounds. Rose maintains that she never experienced any of the child abuse alleged by so many former members of the oppressive organization. One thing she does mention throughout her book and various other interviews is that she always remembers resenting how the women of the cult were treated, as if their only job was to sexually serve the men. Her parents left the group in 1978, and the family moved to Oregon. If you haven't read Brave by Rose McGowan, I really recommend reading it. It's a great read. You know, it's a really powerful, impactful story about a strong woman who has gone through a lot in her life, and she remains brave, and she remains strong for not only for herself, but for other women that, you know, are subject to some of the same treatment. Brave by Rose McGowan. I highly recommend it. When you talk about the children of God, one thing that comes to mind is the name Phoenix. River and Joaquin Phoenix. They grew up in the Children of God movement, along with their siblings. In 1968, Phoenix's mother traveled across the United States. While hitchhiking in California, she met John Lee Bottom, and they married on September 13th, 1969. Ha! 69. Okay, let's get back on track. Their parents were recruited into the cult in the late 60s, early 70s, and they joined the movement aboard their bus and camper convoy, which evangelized throughout the U.S. And if you want to hear more about that, then you should check out episode 1. Eventually, the Phoenixes became missionaries, traveling around the U.S., Venezuela, and Puerto Rico. Along the way, they had a few children: River, Rain, Joaquin, and Liberty. River and Rain would frequently busk and evangelize on the street. In various interviews, Joaquin states that in the late 70s, his family was made aware of the new flirty fishing practices and said, quote, "Fuck this, we're out." So, flirty fishing. We already talked about that. We already discussed flirty fishing. So if you want to learn more about flirty fishing, you can go back in our archives, check it out. In 1979, the family changed their last name to Phoenix. They moved to the U.S. I believe at this point they moved to L.A., but they began focusing all of their energy on their children, which were basically a troupe of child singers and actors. River and Rain formed a brother-sister act, winning multiple talent shows and gaining media attention. The children began appearing in various TV skits and commercials, and on the side, they busked for money. In 1985, River Phoenix had his film debut alongside Ethan Hawke in the science fantasy film Explorers. Now, although this film ends rather abruptly with no real ending at all, it was still a great film. You know, it was almost like if they would have had a sequel, that would have been amazing. Like they left it open-ended because there was really no plot line to Explorers at all. I don't know if everyone's seen it or not. I think it's a pretty obscure movie. But the original ending of the film was that they were going to play baseball on Mars or on the moon. You know, overall, I think Explorers is a really decent film, even though there's really no ending at all. Since River grew up mainly in South American communes, with little exposure to the outside world and almost no schooling at all, he would regularly mispronounce well-known words and phrases, and this became a running joke on the set of Explorers. The idea is River just busked and played guitar and did these performances, and you know, again and again, we'll see that these people, you know, you saw in part 3 of our Children of God series, you see how people in the cult, they don't have time for teaching school. You know, they don't have time for teaching kids. There's no time for school. You are supposed to go out and evangelize and busk and bring money in and bring food in. They would say, hey, we're going around and we're doing this evangelism for God, and we were wondering if you guys could give us some food, right? So we don't have to go dumpster diving. So, you know, River is one of those people where, you know, he's an amazing, talented, handsome, smart, intellectual individual, but he has no schooling. So I'm fairly certain that for a significant part of the beginning of River's career, he came into these issues where he didn't know what people were talking about. He didn't know common phrases or common words. He wasn't exposed to pop culture. In 1991, River told Details magazine that he lost his virginity at the age of 4 while in the Children of God cult. Now, Joaquin would later go on to say that River was only joking, making a mockery of the press as he was asked questions about the cult in every single interview. I personally believe that there is a kernel of truth to this, that there's a little bit of truth. It's difficult to have these kinds of conversations because, a lot of people will block out these types of violent or vicious sexual assaults or early age abuses because it's a difficult traumatic experience, and most people would like to forget about that. Joaquin maintains that River was never molested when they were in the church, that his parents were responsible and they were very mindful of others. Regardless of River's claims and Joaquin's claims and the discussion about some malicious or sexual assault, some incident that happened, on October 31st, 1993, River Phoenix died after overdosing on cocaine and heroin at the Viper Room in Los Angeles. The Viper Room was co-owned by Johnny Depp, and when River passed away, Joaquin Phoenix, Rose Phoenix, Flea from the Red Hot Chili Peppers, Johnny Depp, they were all there, and they all had to watch this. So it's a very traumatic way for such a wonderful, beautiful person to leave this earth. It's a very tragic and sad situation. But regardless of the sexual assault aspect to this, even just being a child, even just being a kid raised in the cult, you still face abuse. You still face, being ostracized and being shunned. He's fortunate that he wasn't separated from his parents, or at least we don't know that he was separated from his parents like a lot of other people were, like young children. He's fortunate in that way. But unfortunately, you can look at his life and you have to say that the cult definitely influenced and impacted the way that he lived the rest of his life. Even if River himself wasn't impacted and changed by the cult, the press was, the media was, and he was constantly referred to as like the cult kid. Like they had all these headlines about how he overcome this cult adversity. So even if River tried to get past it, even if the Phoenix families, the adults, even if they tried to get past this, they couldn't. One final celebrity that we'll talk about is Christopher Owens. Christopher Owens was the frontman for the American indie rock group Girls. He's now a solo artist. Owens was born into the cult in 1979. He described his experience with the cult as, quote, being told everyone else in the world is bad, rejecting technology, rejecting medical research, being devoted to God, and believing America was evil and the end of the world was coming. Owens' older brother died shortly after being born. This is because the group didn't believe in healthcare. And we've seen in the past, I believe it was part 3 of our series, we've seen that the children of God and their lack of faith in medical science. We see in part 3 that a young girl had an illness that caused her to die because, even just those decisions themselves, even just the decision to not allow people who are sick to seek help, that impacts and changes people's lives forever, and sometimes it ends people's lives. Another article I read about Christopher Owens reveals that his mother had to resort to prostitution to make ends meet. Now, whether that's flirty fishing practices or actual prostitution, it's not made clear. At some point in Owens' childhood, his older sister escaped the cult with her boyfriend. At age 16, he was encouraged by his sister to flee as well. Owens says after a while of being completely free for the first time, he ran in the complete opposite direction. After meeting some punk kids, he got a massive Bad Brains tattoo, only ate out of garbage cans, and was frequently arrested. Owens says he was basically rescued by an oil executive who bonded with him over music. After 4 years as this man's assistant, he moved to San Francisco, ending up in the throes of cocaine and heroin. Owens does say that he doesn't regard his time with the children of God as entirely bad, stating, quote, "I miss the sound of 300 people together, singing in a room spanning from age 2 to 50. That's something that I'll never have." See, I don't know if that's necessarily true. He is a relatively famous musician. Maybe you won't have ages 2 to 50, but you could still have a room of 300 plus people singing the same thing. That has to be a decent replacement. There is one other famous person, one other famous musician that I would like to talk about. But like I said earlier on, we're going to save him for another episode after we discuss the book that I'm reading. I think that ends it for today's episode. I just wanted to take a moment to shout out some of our new members, new subscription members. If you sign up at buymeacoffee.com/cabinetOMystery, you'll have access to bonus episodes, early releases, merch discounts, and tons of other great content. So check it out, buymeacoffee.com/cabinetOMystery. Quick shout out for some of our new members: Theo, Izzy, Induced Fear, Hassan, Anthony, Dustin, Zoe, Shelley, and Stephanie. Thank you so much for signing up. Really appreciate you, taking the opportunity to get a sneak peek at the extras that not everybody else gets to see. There's also another 5-star review that I'd like to read. Apollyon NS says, 10 out of 10 would recommend. Awesome content and a great way to stay entertained and awake on backshift. Keep up the good work, brother. And then he throws up the horns at the end. Hell yeah, man. Thank you. Appreciate it. Thanks for the love. This episode is produced by Death Hotel Creative. Hosted by myself, Dr. Mystery. To view more, visit us at notwhatwesay.com. Check us out on our Instagram handle at Cabinet of Mystery, or hit up our Twitter at Open the Cabinet. Please leave us a review if you enjoyed the show, and let us know what topics you'd like to hear in the future. You can hit us up on the socials or at cabinetofmystery@gmail.com. If you'd like to leave us a voice message and appear in upcoming episodes, you can do so at anchor.fm/cabinetofmystery. Thank you so much for listening, and please subscribe or follow for more episodes.